I know. Even just coming in here, we've all been here, and it just, yeah. I just,
All right. I'll just ask the two of you. Yeah. That's okay. All right. So I'll do it after. Sure. Yeah.
No, I'll get it.
Oh, okay.
That was my signal to
Oh.
the staff to close the door.
Okay. All right. Sorry? Oh, yes. Actually, I'm sorry. Who is worthy to be counted among the extraordinary? One who lives with integrity, does what is right, and recognizes the truth, whose tongue does not slander, who does others no evil, who cherishes others who behave honorably. Unwavering, this person will keep a promise even at personal expense. Whoever lives this way will be remembered always. To everything there is a season, and a time to every purpose under heaven. A time to be born and a time to die. A time to plant and a time to pluck up that which is planted. A time to kill and a time to heal. A time to break down and a time to build up. A time to weep and a time to laugh. A time to mourn and a time to dance. A time to cast away stones and a time to gather stones together. A time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing. A time to seek and a time to lose. a time to keep and a time to cast away, a time to rend and a time to sow, a time to keep silence and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time of war and a time of peace. We recognize that each life is a unique combination of potential and limitation, of growth and decline. But most of all, we see that the entirety of every life points us towards a sense of sacredness and mystery that is always present if we but open ourselves to experience it. We have gathered together today to celebrate the life and to mourn the loss of Marilyn Litvene. May her memory be for a blessing. Even as we grapple with the pain of her physical absence, we recall the gift of her presence in our lives. We are thankful for all that was good and true in the way that she lived, and for the precious memories that will endure among all those who knew and loved her. Marilyn Litvene was born on March 11, 1949 in Cleveland, Ohio, to her parents Lynette and Joseph, both first-generation Americans. Their home was multi-generational, with Marilyn's Bubby, her mother's mother, an important presence in the family. Marilyn's life was marked both by significant medical challenges as well as by her ability to establish deep and lasting friendships, her delight in a wide range of activities and experiences, and her commitment to helping others who were in need. When Marilyn was about 8 years old, her family moved from the city of Cleveland to Blanche Road in Cleveland Heights, which was around the corner from Young Israel. In addition to her parents and her maternal grandmother, her family now also included her sister Jan. This would be the neighborhood in which she would spend the rest of her childhood and adolescence, and also where many wonderful memories were made. Marilyn always loved being outdoors, whether it was climbing trees or swimming at the nearby Cumberland Pool. She always found joy in her contact with the natural world. Swimming in particular was an activity that came so naturally to her that it seemed to many that she was born knowing how to swim. Marilyn attended Taylor Road Elementary School, Roosevelt Junior High School, and she graduated from Heights High. She was part of the last class at Heights that was allowed to graduate in the middle of the year, in January, rather than waiting until the end of spring semester. At the age of 12 and a half, Marilyn was diagnosed with juvenile diabetes, and her teenage years were much more complicated and challenging as a result of her having to learn how to live with and manage the demands of this condition. It would also become an ongoing obstacle she would continually need to navigate as she made her way along her path of life. As the Litvene sisters were growing up, they were often exposed to conversation about societal issues of the day around their dinner table. These conversations were mostly instigated by their mother, who was involved in a number of different women's organizations. It's likely that the content of these discussions, in combination with Marilyn's personal experience with a chronic illness, made it clear to her by the time she was in high school that she wanted to pursue a career in some kind of helping profession. Her first foray in this direction following high school graduation took her to a respiratory therapy program in Chicago, but her interest waned after just a few months. At that point, she decided to return to Cleveland, and she found a job working for a local podiatrist and simultaneously started a bachelor's degree in social work at Cleveland State. This professional direction felt much more on target to her, and she decided to make the leap of transferring to Ohio State, where she would complete her coursework and emerge with a social work degree. As things turned out, this was really the one extended period of her life where she spent any significant time outside of the Cleveland area. In an important non-academic development while a student at Ohio State, Marilyn had her first experience of fulfilling her strong connection to animals when she adopted a dog named Sammy. Anticipating that her parents might not be so excited about her bringing a dog home, she delayed the inevitable negotiating by telling them instead that she had adopted a goldfish. In the end, Sammy was allowed to stay, and he remained Marilyn's dear companion for the next 15 years. He was also the first of several canine comrades to accompany Marilyn over the course of her life. With her studies under her belt, she returned to Cleveland and quickly found a social work position with the County Child Welfare Agency. Her supervisors were so impressed with her that they encouraged her to deepen her education by obtaining her master's degree. She applied to and was accepted in the MSAS program at Case Western, and the Welfare Board provided her with a scholarship so she could make it all work financially. After completing her MSW, Marilyn went on to work for several neighborhood-based organizations and ultimately landed in what would be her longest-standing professional role as a social worker in the Office of Endocrinology and Metabolic Disorders at university hospitals. It was in this role that she fulfilled in the most satisfying way her aspiration to be a source of help and guidance to those in need. Her desire to be of help was expressed in a variety of ways. Besides her daily professional interactions in the present, she was committed to supporting organizations that aspire to change things for the better in the future. And so as an adult, she regularly used her swimming prowess to help raise money for research by going many laps in the pool at the annual Juvenile Diabetes fundraiser. She also lovingly took on a central role in caretaking for her parents as they entered their later years. Marilyn was a true people person. She had many friends growing up in her Cleveland Heights neighborhood and continued to connect with people from all walks of life in her adult years. One of her closest and oldest friends was Nick, whom she met in her 20s when she worked at the Child Welfare Agency as a case manager. They remained close for the rest of her life, and even when Nick met his life partner, Mort, the three of them continued to be very much connected with Marilyn. We're very much connected, with Marilyn often accompanying Nick and Mort when they would travel, including one of her most treasured times with the two of them when they vacationed on Nantucket. So many dimensions of Marilyn's life, both personal and professional, were driven by her powerful sense of empathy for others. She instinctively felt it for all people, but it was most pronounced with babies and with animals. Jan and Chuck reflected that it was often difficult to take a walk with her because she would want to stop at any opportunity to connect with a furry creature or a smiling infant that might cross her path along the way. While Marilyn would probably not have described herself as a religious person, her Jewish identity was something that was important to her, and the Jewish community provided her with a sense of grounding. Growing up, her mother was more interested in observance than her father was, and her mother would take her and her sister Jan fairly regularly to attend synagogue services on Shabbat and on holidays. Marilyn's mother also encouraged her and Jan to attend religious school at Community Temple, and they both ended up staying through 12th grade and being confirmed. Participating in the USY youth group was another enjoyable part of her teenage Jewish experience. This attachment to Jewish life stayed with Marilyn into her adult years and provided the motivation that eventually brought her to our congregation, Kol Halev, where she enjoyed connecting with many of our members, and she appreciated how often she met others who shared her values. Marilyn had contended with her diabetes diagnosis throughout her life, from the time of her early adolescence, but as she reached the conclusion of her middle years in her late 50s, she confronted another major medical challenge when she suffered a stroke that impacted her in both physical and cognitive ways. Yet still, Marilyn was determined to live her life and pursue the activities that brought her pleasure, peace, and comfort. She would listen to music and attend concerts whenever she could, especially at the venue that held meaning for her from childhood at her beloved Kane Park. She would invite friends over to her home and cook nourishing meals for them. She would plant and cultivate her garden. She would walk to the neighborhood coffee shop and walk her dogs around the Shaker Lakes. She would keep a good novel ready at hand, and she would often write, evolving her teenage interest in composing poetry into a regular practice of journaling as she grew older. And she was always game for a good movie. It is a poignant dimension of Marilyn's life that despite her love of people and interest in a broad range of activities, she spent the vast majority of her years without a life partner. But that reality was upended not long after she suffered her stroke when she met Chuck Rosenberg. The two of them were blessed with 3 years of loving companionship before Chuck's untimely passing, a loss that undoubtedly left its mark on Marilyn's heart and which stayed with her for the rest of her days. After losing Chuck, Marilyn lived for a while in the apartment the two of them had shared. But soon it was clear that she had to find a new home, less weighted with sad memories. So she moved to Schnurman House in Mayfield Heights, where she stayed for about a year. Tragically, the impact of her stroke continued to negatively affect her cognitive and physical functioning, and so the decision was made in 2017 that she would move to Menorah Park, which would be a safer environment for her. Of course, in that moment, neither Marilyn nor any of her loved ones could have imagined the dramatic threat our entire world would soon be facing in the form of a once-in-several-generations pandemic, a threat that most especially impacted on those who were living in institutional settings. Throughout these last, most difficult years of Marilyn's life, she was consistently and lovingly supported by her sister Jan and brother-in-law Chuck, and by a number of her lifelong friends. Jan specifically mentioned a friend named Paula from many decades earlier with whom Marilyn had lost touch, but who came back into Marilyn's life at exactly this most trying time. Paula would visit Marilyn at Menorah on a regular basis, reflecting back to her the care and tenderness that Marilyn had shared with many special people in her life. About 3.5 weeks ago, Marilyn's difficult-to-control diabetes sent her from Menorah Park into the ICU. She eventually stabilized and was able to return to her room for just 1 day, but soon was on her way back to the hospital. There was some thought and a hope that she would be able to return to Menorah for hospice care, but that was not to be. Still, in her last week of life, she regained some of her lost capacity for expressive communication that had slowly been taken from her over the past number of years. And she spoke to her loved ones for what would be the final few times. She conveyed a legacy of courage, of resilience, of love, and of dedication. A reservoir of spiritual nourishment that will continue to strengthen and inspire all those who were most dear to her. Zichrona livracha, may her memory be for a blessing. At this time, I would like to invite her sister Jan to come forward and share a few reflections on Marilyn's life.
Thank you. I would just want to thank those of you who came, who have known Mir for much of her life. And actually, I did write something. I'm not going to read it all. I would like to thank Chuck for dictating it. He's a better typer. And Rabbi Kurt from North Park was here earlier, and he wanted to be with Marilyn and also bless her way along the journey. And he wanted me to pass on that he had felt her to be a part of the community there. And actually, everyone always talked about how pleasant my sister was. So that's good. Let's see, so Rabbi Kurz, what else? Oh, okay. So I just wrote, Marilyn was my one and only sister. As young children, there were ways we were alike and lots of ways we were different. Marilyn was a child of the night. She enjoyed getting up and watching the moon. She also wanted to investigate the coffee and pastry that people were having in the kitchen. I, on the other hand, fell asleep easily and everywhere. This included under tables at bar mitzvah parties, whereas Mir was out talking to people and socializing. With very different kinds of temperament. I wrote, Marilyn could have much wider range of emotions than I did, which meant she got angry at times. She usually wanted to express her opinions, which had its good points, but led to her having more arguments with our mom. We grew up with my mom and dad and my bubby, who was my mom's mom. When Mom got married, my dad, who had recently returned for World War II, moved into the two-flat on Omen, two-flat up and down, in Omen, in the city of Cleveland. When I asked my mom why she and my dad married, she told me that when GIs returned for Europe, there was a lot of quick marriages, as people wanted to get on with their lives and create families. The two-flat was very small. We lived on one floor, and most of our time there, our Aunt Flo and Uncle Al lived upstairs. Many events occurred in the two-flat, such as the smell of my Aunt Flo's cooking coming down the steps. And Aunt Flo was Hungarian, and she always burnt her food. So my mom had been the only girl. I had 4 brothers. Her father had been a tailor and actually had been in charge, I think, of a supervisor, too. In our house, we had a pair of huge scissors. And one day, my dad used those scissors to cut Marilyn's bangs. So I went, so Marilyn ended up real robot. She was not a happy camper. Fridays were a special day in our house because there was Sabbath. My family always kept kosher until my grandmother died. Our bubby would make bread and pastry on Friday. I loved my bubby. Mir wasn't as comfortable as her. Later I found out that there was my first cousin from Susie Solomon, that she never felt my bubby was that warm and welcoming. I just wrote things like, Mir loved being outdoors, which you addressed. Then I wrote, on the other hand, I enjoyed being inside, playing with dolls, having a doll hospital, and sneezing all the time as I was allergic to outside. Our house at that time seemed full of life, and when we were small, 3 of the 4 of my mom's brothers passed away. This brought great sadness to my mom and Bobby, which lingered for years. When I was around 5 or 6, we moved to Cleveland Heights. The single-family house in which we lived seemed so much bigger than the two flats. There was a group of kids who played outside on the street, which included Joe Bretman, who's here today, and his sister Roz, who was a tomboy, joined the street action. Her best friend Kitty lived down the street and was Marilyn's very good friend. Then it says, the Retmans were an integral part of us growing up. They lived 2 doors down, and Edith was my mom's best friend. Tell me if I go on too long. Okay. The neighborhood we moved into had many Orthodox Jewish families. There was young Israel around the corner. On the other, if we walked up the street on Taylor, we got to go to Latza Mendel and get rye bread and challah. There's a kosher butcher there, and a store called Heights Variety. Heights Variety was owned by Molly and George Katz. Molly had known my mom since a little girl. She had ended up taking my mom to register for school, as my grandmother didn't know English. My Aunt Molly told the school that my mom's name was Lynette. Her birth name's Elizabeth. Molly was reading a book called A Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court. And Lynette was in that book. Our neighborhood was full of first-generation Eastern European immigrants, some of who had survived the Holocaust and had been in concentration camps. There were also many who left Europe due to religious persecution and to have their kids conscripted into the Tsarist army. Mira and I grew up knowing that there were lots of ways to have a life and that there were forces one could die from that were unseen and dangerous. My mom was active in Jewish women's organization where my dad called himself a Buddhist and always had to be dragged to temple. My dad was a jokester, and there's many more stories about him than my sister. For instance, he would call Nick, who was with Nick and Mort, when he got more confused, he either thought Nick was her husband or was trying to harm her. But the famous story is at Seder one year, my father got up and instead of starting with traditional Seder, he started reciting the Gettysburg Address. While at one point with the crowd, my mother wasn't very happy. Mira and I viewed our parents as not that happily married, and were convinced they had sex twice to get Marilyn and I. My mom ended up working at a factory in the office, which produced brass bearings. It was called Buckeye Brass. She worked in the office with my Aunt Sally, who was my dad's only sister. My Aunt Sally and Uncle Walter ended up having my cousin Ellie, who's in the front row, come live with them. Ellie felt like always kind of like a sister. I have lots of memories of her in the back, her in her apartment. Actually, I always like to take all her money out of this little bank and count the quarters. And in the back seat of Aunt Sally's car, where my mom was in the front and the three of us were in the back, and we went off and played skee ball at Conneaut State Park, or we did stuff. So Ellie grew up, moved to Rochester, married Dave Copperell, another Clevelander, and had 3 kids. So Sarah is here today, and her sister Diane, who couldn't attend today, is probably watching, and Gary is doing whatever Gary does in the universe. Their children were frequent visitors at my parents' house and when later Marilyn's house. They also loved Sam, the dog, but then everybody loved Sam. Okay. And actually, Sarah told me about how empathetic Mare could be. She listened, and people felt like they were understood. It's been a gift to talk with people about her. Should I stop or go on? Okay, here we go. When I was 6, my hair fell out one day due to a diagnosis of an autoimmune disorder called alopecia areata. I got a lot of attention for this by adults who I always felt I could fall into their arms for protection. When Mare developed juvenile diabetes at the age of 12 and a half, I always felt that Mare was told she should just follow the program. But, and my dad had been diabetic, and, so there were a lot of disagreements about how do you control blood sugars and what kind of food you eat. So Mare was told she was lucky that insulin had been developed. But seeing a child who has childhood onset diabetes is not easy for a young girl. Our cousins, I called her Susie, now she's Susan, was also a source of comfort for her because she had also developed juvenile diabetes at 12 and a half. Both Mare and I, having grown up in this environment, became social workers. Marilyn did it first. She was a social worker. I was the artist. And when she went off to school at University of Chicago, I remember driving through the stockyards of Chicago, which was busy killing animals to make meat. It smelled bad. Mare came back. And then so I put because she was a young adult in the family in the 60s, in our family, she was also interested in social issues. Marilyn would end up telling my parents some of the things she was doing at college. They disapproved of. I won't mention that. I, on the other hand, did the exact same thing, but never told my parents. Until I brought home 13 long-haired student radicals who had come to Chicago for an SDS convention. I, of course, called my mom and asked if we could all come for dinner. My mom, being a very good hostess, said, of course. Mom said they had extra food in the pantry in the basement, and we'd be fine. It wasn't a good night after they left because we yelled for a long time, and Marilyn was very kind and refereed. I moved to Chicago in 1980, and I never returned to Cleveland. Mare was a person who provided so much care to my mom and dad. Marilyn inherited my mother's love for inviting everyone in for coffee and conversation and inviting people for dinner. Then I just said that Mork and Knit were the main, Mort and Nick were the mainstays of Mare's social life. She was with them most every weekend. I talked about her living on Kenilworth, and unfortunately she lost the house due to a number of factors, changes in the economy, not being able to get renter. My sister always loved books, social causes, animal, the arts. That was very common interest between her and Chuck. There's a lot of other stories about my sister. Some are funny, some are sad, some are brave, some are about her despondency. Though Mare really loved to laugh. As her medical illnesses grew worse and her level of being able to be in the world decreased, I felt really sad. Even now, everyone tells me how pleasant and well-mannered she is. And when she was in Manor Park, she always had a smile for everyone, except when she was in physical therapy, because she didn't like being told what to do. And she couldn't do it. Perceptual problem. It was hard. I was always taller in height than Mare. She would always tease her and tell her I was her older sister, usually always in public. But that was our way of being siblings. Each of us have had our own life and ways of being in the world. My hope is that wherever Mare's spirit is, that she finds comfort and joy, points of light and laughter and peace within herself. Just kind of one last thing. I always felt like I was the one protecting Marilyn, and I don't think that was true in hindsight. I remember one time when kids were picking me in elementary school, she and Ellie went to my defense. But, through this time, I feel like somehow internally she did protect me as an older sibling. And while I don't have a lot of memories, in this I said, I have to take care of Mary because my mom would have wanted me to. And then I wanted to too, though it wasn't always so easy. So I just wanted to thank Mary for protecting me. And that's the end, except everybody in this room has been with her through various life cycles. I do want to thank Doris and Valerie, Doris knew Mary when she first moved to Schneerman, and they would go out and go to Barnes and Nobles, or it might have even been could have been Borders, and Doris also loves political things and books and music, and so we all hope Kamala becomes president. And you guys know how much support you've been through time. I'd also like to thank my friends here, because while I left in 1980, I've only stayed 3 times in a hotel. So I'm a frequent visitor with Ellie and Jean and Linda. So that's it. But thanks. Oh, Dory, my best friend, from junior and senior. We walked together to school every day. So, and thank you. That's it. I went on too long.
No, you did not.
Chip wanted to.
No. Thank you so very much, Jan, for painting all those amazing pictures of life with Marilyn and in your family, and just, at least for someone like me who isn't as familiar with those experiences, really brought that to life in a beautiful way. Chuck, do you want to come up and say a few things too? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, great.
I want to start by just saying that crazily through this moment, I really fell in love with my wife. I love you dearly. I think the way that you live in the world, the way that you cared for Marilyn is distinct, and I love you so much. Just want to start with that. This is a little bit of Marilyn to me. I'm not and have never been Marilyn's sister, so I cannot represent that perspective. It doesn't have to always be fancy or profound when I think about how I truly feel about a person. What most centrally comes to mind about Marilyn for me was her smile, her initial bursts of joy when she first saw me and everyone else she knew and cared about. It seems that in looking at pictures of her, even when she was a small girl, her mouth's curves seemed permanently to have been either in a smile or immediately ready for one. What seems to me worth thinking about and noting, what is it that she did to allow her to seem to have this stance, this readiness to approach people from that place? As I continue to think about Marilyn, I'm with a sense that she did not seem overtly to need or want to be the center of attention, but rather to sit and listen, which I think Jan highlighted, and enter into conversations as she felt it or if invited. On a more personal note, I want to say that I like that Marilyn could have a good giggle over my mediocre sense of humor and over a lot of other things in life. I will be forever grateful to her for being able to put on this facade of pleasure, and to also in the nursing home kind of look at my third grade graduation pictures over and over again. I do want to note, and perhaps this won't be represented today, that a part of what Marilyn meant to me was my witnessing Jan being vigilant and forever patient in providing her the best quality of life. This witnessing of a human being caring for her sister deeply moves me and inspires me to be a better caretaker of others in this precious life. Finally, another tidbit about Marilyn is that prior to Jan and my getting married over 17 years ago, I invited guests to submit one love song they might want played at our reception. Unfortunately, 6 weeks before the wedding, Marilyn had a stroke and wasn't able to attend. But what we had and what I continue to have on my musical playlist is what she chose. Tony Bennett's Fly Me to the Moon. With this soaring note to the word fly. So perhaps my wish for Marilyn is that her essence can fly to the moon and impact all parts of the universe between Cleveland and the moon of ours. I wish you a good flight, Marilyn, one that you perhaps were not able to have on this earth.
Thank you so much, Chuck, for those open-hearted and heart-opening reflections on Marilyn's life. I'd like to, at this time, invite anyone who's physically comfortable doing so to rise for the chanting of the memorial prayer. El Malei Rachamim Shochen Bamromim המצא מנוחה נכונה תחת כנפי השכינה. במעלות קדושים וטהורים כזוהר כי המזהירים את נשמת משה בת יוסף אליזבת שהלכה לעולמה. אנא בעל הרחמים הסתיריה בסתר כנפיך לעולמים, וצרור בצרור החיים את נשמתה. אדוני הוא נחלתה, ותנוח בשלום על משכבה, ונאמר Amen. Divine source of mercy, dwelling in the heavens' heights and in the depths of our hearts, bring proper rest beneath the wings of your divine presence, amid the ranks of the holy and the pure, illuminating like the brilliance of the skies the soul of Marilyn Litvene, who has gone to her eternal place of rest. May you, who are the source of mercy, shelter her beneath your wings eternally, and bind her soul among the living, that she may rest in peace. And together let us say, Amen. Please be seated. Burial will take place immediately following the service today at Mount Olive Cemetery. And following burial, not immediately following burial, but later this afternoon, the family will receive friends at 16811 Fernway Drive in Shaker Heights between 3 and 5 p.m. this afternoon, outside in the backyard. Friends who wish to may contribute to Breakthrough TID, which is a juvenile diabetes research foundation, at www.breakthroughtid.org.
If there are any of those who are acting as pallbearers or able to act as pallbearers, please step forward. Those who are going to act as pallbearers, I'm going to have you step up this aisle with Mr. Hollow. We're going to bring the casket to you. So if you'll come this way, please. Right there. In just a moment, once everyone's back, we're going to go directly to our cars. We'll follow behind the casket, and then from there we'll have the procession to the cemetery. All right, if everyone would rise, please. Members of the family, I'll have you follow behind. We'll go directly onto your cards. Friends, any of you who are going with us to the cemetery, I remind you, you must manually turn on your headlights. It's daytime and you're automatic headlights will not come on, so I need you to turn them on manually. You may, to the rear